In the middle of the 14th century, people went to bed healthy and woke up dying. Not sick, not weak, dying. A sudden fever, unbearable pain, and then dark swollen lumps rising beneath the arms and along the neck. Within hours, families vanished. Within days, entire neighbourhoods went silent. Church bells rang so often that cities stopped counting the dead. Graveyards overflowed, streets emptied, and across Europe one terrifying question echoed from city to city. Was this the end of the world? What no one understood was that they were living through the deadliest pandemic in recorded human history. A catastrophe so vast it would kill nearly half of Europe, collapse entire communities, and permanently reshape civilization itself. This was the Black Death, and once it arrived, there was no escape. Before we dive into how this nightmare unfolded and why it changed the world forever, take a moment to like this video, share it with a fellow history lover, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel for more deep, story-driven documentaries like this one. Your support keeps history alive. Now, to understand the devastation that followed, we first need to understand the height from which humanity fell. The world before the plague. Europe at its peak. The early 14th century was not a dark or backward age. It was the high point of the High Middle Ages, a period of growth, confidence and connection unmatched since the Roman Empire. Thanks to generations of favourable climate during the medieval warm period, harvests had been strong and reliable. Europe's population had nearly doubled in just 2 centuries. Cities burst beyond their old Roman walls. Paris, Florence, Venice and London were crowded, loud and alive with commerce. Cathedrals rose toward the sky, not just as places of worship, but as symbols of a society that believed it was advancing, improving and drawing closer to God. Trade networks stretched farther than ever before. A merchant in Italy could buy silk from Asia, spices from India, and silver from Central Europe without ever leaving established routes protected by the vast Mongol Empire. The world had become interconnected in a way medieval people had never experienced. It felt like progress. It felt like stability. But that same interconnected world had quietly built the perfect infrastructure for disaster. The origin of the plague, an invisible enemy. Far from Europe's stone cities, in the windswept steppes of Central Asia, an ancient killer had existed for thousands of years. Yersinia pestis, a highly efficient bacterium, lived in balance among burrowing rodents like marmots and ground squirrels. For centuries it remained largely isolated from humans. Then, in the early 1400s, that balance broke. Environmental stress, possibly driven by sudden climate shifts, disrupted food sources and forced infected rodents closer to human settlements. Their fleas came with them. Along the Silk Road, the bacterium made its fatal leap from animals to people. The first human victims suffered sudden fevers, violent illness, and the horrifying swellings called buboes. Entire communities along trade routes began to die. News travelled slowly, but fear travelled faster. Merchants whispered of cities vanishing in the east of lands left empty by pestilence. Europe listened, but felt distant. The disaster seemed far away. It wasn't. The turning point came in 1346 at the port city of Kaffa, a wealthy trading hub on the Crimean Peninsula. It was the vital link between Asian land routes and Mediterranean sea trade. When the city was besieged by a Mongol army, no one could have imagined that this conflict would reshape global history. As the siege dragged on, the plague swept through the Mongol camps. Soldiers died in staggering numbers. Facing collapse, the Mongol leader made a desperate and horrifying decision. Plague-infected corpses were hurled over the city walls using siege engines. The fortress fell not to armies, but to biology. Terrified Genoese merchants fled by ship, carrying not just goods and refugees, but rats, fleas, and death itself. Those ships sailed west, directly into the heart of Europe. Europe ignites ports, cities, and collapse. The first major European city to fall was Messina in Sicily. When ships arrived, their decks were just, littered with dead and dying sailors. Authorities tried to expel them, but honestly, it was already too late. The disease exploded through the city, then radiated outward. From there, the plague moved like wildfire. Genoa, Venice, Marseille, Barcelona. Trade routes became, death routes. Cities were perfect breeding grounds. Narrow streets, crowded homes, open sewage, and dense populations allowed the disease to overwhelm communities in just a matter of weeks. Doctors were helpless. Germ theory did not exist. People blamed poisoned air, planetary alignments, and even divine punishment. Treatments only worsened the suffering. As fear took hold, society began to unravel. Parents abandoned children, priests died alongside their congregations. Laws stopped being enforced. The dead piled up faster than they could be buried, forcing cities to dig massive plague pits. The sound of life vanished, replaced by silence and the constant toll of bells, until even the bells fell quiet. Faith, fear, and human darkness. With no scientific explanation, people turned to faith. Processions filled the streets, spreading the disease further. When prayers failed, extremism followed. Flagellant groups marched across Europe, whipping themselves in public displays of penance. Then came the search for scapegoats. Jewish communities were accused of poisoning wells. Pogroms erupted. Entire populations were massacred in one of the darkest chapters of medieval history. The plague did not just kill bodies, it stripped away humanity. The countryside falls and the world changes. The countryside did not escape. Villages vanished. Fields went unharvested. Animals wandered unattended. Wolves returned to abandoned lands. By 1351, the plague had burned through Europe, killing perhaps half its population. But from that devastation emerged transformation. Labour shortages shattered feudal systems. Survivors demanded higher wages and better conditions. Art fixated on death. Authority was questioned. The medieval world ended, and the foundations of the modern world were laid. Why the Black Death still matters. The Black Death was not just a medieval disaster. It was a stress test for civilization itself. It exposed how fragile societies are when faced with invisible threats. Empty streets, fear of the air, locked homes. Does that really sound like ancient history? The plague reminds us that history does not repeat exactly, but it echoes. Final call to action. If you found this documentary valuable, make sure to subscribe for more deep dive history content. Share this video with someone who loves the past, and leave a comment with your thoughts. Together, we keep history alive. I'll see you in the next era.